Well, hello everyone. How is the Facebook world? How is YouTube world? How is Rumble world today? Just everyone type from what country you're watching. If you're in United States, what state you're watching. I have exciting guest with me today. Make sure you like and subscribe and like the stream, share with friends. So we will have a great discussion and more people could watch it. Again, everyone welcome. I have exciting guest with me today. Larry Johnson is in the house. Hello, Larry. How are you?
Hi, Elena. Good to be with you.
Larry is the former Central Intelligence Agency analyst. Larry is the founder and I believe co-owner of Berg Associates. Larry is a former counterintelligence specialist at the State Department. Larry has a stellar career in United States government. So today we have a privilege of asking Larry everything we always wanted to know about CIA, FBI, hopefully the Biden administration insights into what is happening in the United States. And what is happening with surveillance of United States citizens? What is happening with Russia, Ukraine? What is happening with rise of China? I'm sure Larry will provide us excellent insights today. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, with us today. Hi, Larry again.
Elena, I'm ready to go.
Ready to go. Larry, with your stellar career, could you enlighten our audience? What is the actual purpose of Central Intelligence Agency? What is the purpose of CIA?
In theory or in reality?
Both. Tell us in theory and then preface it with the reality.
The theory behind the CIA was that the U.S. government should have an intelligence organization that could collect information, critical information overseas to know what our adversaries, potential adversaries, were up to, and collect that information, and then have analysts who could objectively review that information and tell the government officials what is likely to happen, or what they need to be aware of, or what threats they need to focus on. And that's the theory. And then with attached to that was a science and technology unit that could develop new techniques for helping case officers in the field communicate clandestinely with agents, foreign agents or foreigners who've been recruited to spy. So that's how it's supposed to work in theory. In practice, what has happened is the CIA became a tool for politicians to use to go after foreign political opponents. And in many cases, those foreign political opponents became opponents or adversaries or enemies because those foreign countries were interfering with certain international or U.S. Corporations. So the tradition of what happened in Central America with the United Brand Fruit Company, the United States constantly involved with fomenting coups, ousting governments. The same with Iran, where Mossadegh was ousted. And so what you've seen is the CIA really has become a tool, I don't believe it's acting on its own. It's always in response to let's call them political masters. That is the notion that you get objective analysis. It happens occasionally, but there are enormous political pressures, both internal and external, that dissuade people from being able to actually tell the truth about what's going on. We're seeing that right now with respect to what's happening in Ukraine. If you saw Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, testify the other day before the Senate Armed Services Committee, he has insisted that because Russia is now deploying T-54 tanks and moving them to the front, that's a sign that Russia has lost so many tanks and can't replace them. Well, the source of that information was from a group the CIA set up back in 2014 to organize opposition to Vladimir Putin in Russia. And they claim that they have pictures of these T-54s, and they assumed, I mean, even the article they published, they assumed those tanks were going to be going to Ukraine. Well, you jump from that to here's Austin now repeating it as if that's true. It's not, but that is an example where a good analyst would have intervened and said, no, wait a second, we have examined overhead imagery. We can tell you how many tanks have actually been destroyed by the Ukrainians over the last 6 months. We can show you the factory, the photographs of the factory or factories that Russia built. We can count the number of tanks coming out of that factory. So there are ways that you can come up and do good analysis that's based on fact. Austin wasn't doing that. He was just repeating propaganda. And the propaganda has one point: to energize and unify support in the West to go after and destroy Russia without really a regard for what the implications of this war are for U.S. national security interests around the world.
Thank you, Larry. So it appears that John Bolton, I believe a former or a national security advisor, came out and said that I participated, he said, in staging the coups. In one of his interviews, he said, and then quickly corrected himself, but not in this country. So then we have General Petraeus in his interview just recently, maybe a month ago, said to the reporter that we're hoping for the regime change in Russia or something along these lines. And we're hoping for the internal, removal of this regime. But of course, our beloved agency, he means CIA, because he used to be a director of CIA, is working on this actively. So does that mean that CIA is actively involved in changing regimes around the world, which in my understanding would be against, or is against rather, UN Charter to participate in changing regimes around the world of any country, at least a member of UN?
Well, right. But, that CIA has been actively involved over the years in trying to foment let's call them coups, to change regimes. I know the popular conventional wisdom is that the CIA got rid of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. But I know from talking to one of my friends who was actually a CIA case officer there at the time, he was expressing a lot of frustration. Yeah, the CIA wanted to get rid of Allende, but the Chilean Navy was keeping the CIA at arm's length, not even communicating with the CIA. But they were happy to let the CIA take the blame, which is, somewhat humorous. But we've seen it repeated with the ouster and the destruction of Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega, Muammar Gaddafi, attempts to get rid of Castro. The Maidan coup in 2014, that was engineered by the CIA, British MI6. Was it last year? More than a little more a year ago, the CIA tried to engineer again another coup in Belarus. They tried in Kazakhstan. So that's what I was talking about earlier in response to your first question about what is the CIA in theory and in practice. And the action elements in what used to be called the directive of operations, it's very pernicious that they end up being able to organize political efforts that they can fund groups that can take to the street and protest, and to change these governments without any real consideration about what comes next. I've always been sort of puzzled and troubled by the U.S. government. The way the message is sold to the U.S. public is we have to have a villain, and so we always get a personality, whether it's the Ayatollah Khomeini, Manuel Noriega, Muammar Gaddafi, Vladimir Putin. if only we get rid of Vladimir Putin, everything will be okay. Well, that's just a lie. It's not true. They fail to take into account the complexity of these governments and the fact that it's not just one individual. It's not the Adolf Hitler model. We like our historical reference point is always referring to people like an Adolf Hitler or a Joseph Stalin, the one man who made it all happen, without really having an understanding of the political systems they put in place, which enabled them to lead and to be the point person. But it was really it was not just the work of one madman, and we can't change the world by just getting rid of one person.
Thank you, Larry. In other words, the role of villainizing a leader of the world and then trying to remove that leader without the actual intelligence work behind it. Would you say then that CIA right now is not the same CIA when you served there? Did it change? Do you see?
Yeah.
You mentioned Lloyd Austin. You said the intelligence that he was feeding, it seems to have been collected from the source that had no value, and then it was presented to the White House. How do you see the CIA changed over the years compared to when you were there?
It has become very much a mascot of the political parties that rule. When I entered the CIA, we were, we had to take a polygraph, and one of the questions on the polygraph was to ascertain whether or not you were homosexual. And the belief was that they did not want to have any active homosexuals within the intelligence services for fear that that could be used as an element of blackmail. Well, that happened because there were some prominent CIA officials who turned out to be homosexual. One fellow who was in charge of actually the Soviet operations in the 1990s. And he was, he managed to lie to the polygraph and get hired. So what's happened since then is they've eliminated the lifestyle questions. So now CIA is most actively promoting homosexuality, transgender rights, and again, when that becomes the focus of your organization, you've clearly lost your sense of direction and purpose about what you're supposed to be focused on. This catering to the social justice, politically correct mentality means that a lot of times the United States is sending intelligence officers undercover into situations where they're going to stand out. For example, sending a woman to a very conservative Muslim country where the women were supposed to wear hijabs and such, and the CIA woman is not going to subject herself to that. She's going to, etc. So that ends up working against its own efficiency. I know I've been told that they have a day celebrating lesbians, and they literally ride motorcycles around the CIA headquarters building. It was called Dykes on Bikes. So, when you get into this kind of nonsense, it takes away your focus from what you should be concerned with, which is developing a knowledge of those foreign countries that you are responsible for, understanding the language, understanding the culture, understanding the political motivations, and then being able to both identify people that you want to collect, that you want to get on your side, that will provide you with information, and then be able to objectively evaluate that information. That's really not taking place anymore. It's become highly politicized.
Understand. So basically, intelligence now is the extension of political agenda, and it's not based on mental acuity. It's not based on growing networks of the capable people. It's more or less the extension of the current policies of a current administration and how they act.
Yeah, we can always talk about the ideal of what the intelligence is supposed to be, but this political pressure has always been a problem. We go back to the Vietnam War, where was Daniel Ellsberg's public when he released the Pentagon Papers, which showed the actual doubts and the actual facts that were undergirding U.S. policy with respect to Vietnam. But what was being said in public was quite different. And I was fortunate to be trained as an analyst by one of the giants of that era, a guy named George Allen. And George had been in charge. He was the manager for the analytical side of the house dealing with Vietnam. And he described the enormous pressure he came under from members of the Lyndon Johnson administration, from Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, who was the national security advisor. You know, they'd be calling him up and berating him and telling him, why aren't you being a team player? So I don't want to leave the impression that there was never a time where politics did not intrude. But what we're seeing now is that the actual politics that are extant in Washington with respect to Ukraine is really, it's both being used to suppress information that ought to be discussed, and then to present information that should be dismissed because it comes from self-serving interest.
Thank you, Larry. Today, there was an announcement that the Biden administration has allocated 500 or 690 rather million, and they will be creating a special agency, a new department, and Congress will be funding 6.9 billion. That's a request for more foreign influence operations. Does it mean that this will be a part of CIA budget, or like how CIA gets funded?
Yeah, well, you know, CIA money is hidden within DoD budget in part. What's really sort of funny about this is if you bring up the issue of foreign interference in the U.S. election, particularly Russian interference, it's outrageous. We can't have this. People get very angry and upset about it. Yet we turn around and we do the same thing overseas. In fact, we do it far more extensively and with far more adverse effects. And so it's just a complete contradiction of terms that the United States is so willingly and openly engaging. It used to be there were attempts to hide it. Now we're not even hiding it. So elements like the National Endowment for Democracy, they're being used to fund a variety of journalists and other activities overseas, all under the banner of promoting democracy, when it's just the opposite. All it is trying to promote U.S. interests, and the U.S. interests are quite selfish, quite narrow, and really have all to do about gathering resources, taking the resources of other countries. I mean, frankly, that's why Russia's in the crosshairs. The richest country in the world in terms of natural resources is Russia, and the West is just jealous and greedy, wanting to take control of those.
Thank you, Larry. Talking about foreign influence, have you seen recent protests in Georgia? And
Yeah.
Biden and other state officials came out, and of course, the European leaders came out and said that, oh, we support the protests, and this is a really terrible law, and the law that was proposed by Georgian Parliament, majority of the Parliament, was actually regarding foreign agents. And
Right.
their law, in their version, actually mimicked and mirrored our own American United States law on foreign agents. Only the Republic of Georgia's law, as proposed, was much softer. We have the Foreign Agents, I believe, Act, or a law in the books that was adopted in 1928, 1932, something along those lines, that state that foreign agents have to register and foreign influencers have to register, including individuals and corporations. The Republic of Georgia proposed law was only with limited amount. For example, if the organization receives 20% from the foreign influence government, or it was not even extended to individuals like United States law is. But everybody dubbed that law Russia's law, and they, through this huge protests, basically attacked the Georgia's parliament. And United States said, yes, this is a terrible law, and we are supporting protesters. Minor detail, we have the same law, only much more strict in United States. So we're constantly pursuing double standards. So we don't want the Republic of Georgia to protect its citizens from foreign influence, including Soros Fund and ourselves. But we want ourselves, United States, to be protected from foreign influence. So it's just really bizarre how obvious the doors that we want to keep opened into other countries to allow CIA operatives, to allow various influence of foreign policies and government and population. And we call that undemocratic if they want to protect their own sovereignty. But we are protecting ours with the ironclad door. So yeah, it's just bizarre. It's bizarre to see our double standard. Next question. Go ahead, Larry, if you have a comment.
No, I was just going to say we're very good at hypocrisy and double standards.
Yep. Thank you, everybody who is watching us. Please type what United states you're watching, what time is over there, and what countries. And if you have questions for Larry, I will get back to it a little bit later. So have some patience, guys, and keep typing your comments and where you're watching from. Next question. With the CIA being so powerful, and you mentioned MI6, my understanding that in Ukraine, and I of course, I'm fluent in Ukrainian and Russian because I used to live down there and grew up there overseas, right? Was born in USSR, I was going to say United States, territory of Ukraine, and then it became an independent country when I graduated from university. And so with my understanding that everything I read and see, that there is certainly a CIA influence, but there is also MI6 influence, like you said, Larry. Which agency prevails? Do they cooperate, or does one want to have an upper hand on their assets in Ukraine? In other words, is it a friendly competition, or is it actually rivalry there between MI6 and CIA in Ukraine?
There will be, I think, the latter, probably more rivalry than actual cooperation. But you need to understand, I mean, what most people do not appreciate is that this relationship with Ukraine dates back to the end of World War II. And as the emphasis shifted from once the Nazis were defeated, that then the Stalin's communist Soviet Union, and again, with the emphasis being on Stalin, was viewed as the biggest threat. And again, everything the Soviets did was couched in terms of communist intent for world domination. I think a better case could have been made that, you know, the Soviets were quite concerned about shoring up their Western borders so that they would be secure, and that working against what they saw as Western imperialism to try to destroy them. So the United States and Great Britain both recruited and protected former Nazis, including members of the SS, and used them to recruit and organize insurgent movements in Ukraine that carry activities in the Soviet Union, basically Russia today. So this, you know, we're talking of 60 years, at least 60, 70-year relationship. And so the intelligence relationships get passed down from generation to generation, from grandfather to father to son. And similarly at CIA, they keep records of sources both past and present, and any relationships that will cultivate back then. The Brits in particular, though, took a greater interest in Ukraine by bringing a number of the Ukrainian Nazis into Germany, and then many of them emigrated as well subsequently to Canada. The was it Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland. Her great, I guess it was her grandfather, was actively involved with the Nazis in former Ukraine at the time. I guess it was Poland, but what's now considered Ukraine, as part of a propaganda operation. So she's got, her family comes with long ties to this. So you really need to understand history in order to understand what's going on today. It's not just out of the blue. They didn't just decide, okay, we're going to back the Bandera factions in Ukraine against those factions aligned with the former Soviets. That's how it's being portrayed.
Yes, at the time, the agency, and it was not called CIA at the time, it was CIS or something. I forget what the abbreviation was. At the time, after the World War II, shielded basically a Bandera nationalist, the Ukrainian nationalist, who organized the volunteer SS division and did some ethnic cleansings of hundreds of thousands of people, Polish, Jewish, Russian ethnic cleanses of Roma, you name it. Those people were shielded from Nuremberg trials by what my understanding is now is CIA operatives. And unfortunately, it appears that we do that a lot. And Hillary Clinton, I think in one of her interviews, actually admitted, she said, well, we funded Wahhabists, we brought them into Afghanistan, and then they started to turn on us, she said. And she said, we do it all the time. We will find the radical element, and then we radicalize them, we fund them. And they helped us to fight Soviets in Afghanistan. We brought them in, but then they turned on us, talking about bin Laden on this other story. So bin Laden's story, he was our operative, correct? The United States were funding his operations at some point.
Actually, not bin Laden. I mean, we were funding other, at least 6 different, what we would consider today radical Islamic groups, excuse me, in Afghanistan. But bin Laden was really outside of our control. At least, Mill, who was running at the time, Frank Anderson, and said they were not dealing with bin Laden. And bin Laden, frankly, he was very much of a Saudi nationalist and didn't want to do anything to be beholden to the United States either. So it still doesn't alleviate the fact that the United States was actively funding some of these Islamic extremist groups, or groups that we would consider ultra-nationalist today as well, in places like Afghanistan. And then we act surprised when those groups continue to pursue their interests. And so when their interests are no longer aligned with ours, all of a sudden we view that as a betrayal. I know that Hekmar Gul in Afghanistan was one that we used during the war against the Soviets, and then he turned against us subsequent to our invasion in 2001, 2002. So it is, there is not an ideological purity test that a foreign group must take and pass in order for the United States to consider providing support to it. One of the ironies is the United States claims it has been fighting ISIS, and yet many of the fighters in ISIS were in fact trained by the United States through our special forces missions. So it's just very, very convoluted process.
Does CIA have sleeper agents like Russia did here in the United States? Or does CIA, I don't know, how do they recruit the foreign nationals and these extremist groups? I mean, what do they exactly do?
Well, see, that's been one of the problems that the CIA has had. It is a much more constrained approach to developing foreign intelligence assets than, say, countries like Russia, like Israel, even like Poland. Uh, the United States traditionally, its intelligence officers were assigned as under State Department cover or military cover, so they'd be working out of embassies, and then working out of embassies, their job was to try to identify individuals with the Russian who worked for the Soviet embassies at the time, or with the Chinese embassy, foreign diplomats or individuals that worked with those embassies that could possibly be recruited. So that entire process of what they call spotting and assessment, leading to making a pitch, making a sales presentation to convince them to come to your side. What happened then when the threat shifted to terrorism? Well, the the Bin Ladens and such aren't hanging out at embassy parties. They're not part of the diplomatic circuit, and that means you have to go into a whole different world in order to possibly gain access to those networks. Well, the CIA was completely ill-equipped to do that. I think, frankly, the one organization within the U.S. government from a law enforcement standpoint that probably had the best access to potential members of those groups, the Drug Enforcement Administration, simply because they deal with people who are involved with criminal networks, actual street level folks, and that's the place where you're going to find these terrorist organizations. So the CIA really became reliant on third-party information with respect to a lot of these terrorist organizations, and frankly, some of the terrorism was used politically in terms of exaggerating the threat in order to justify larger defense and intelligence budgets, to present the threat as if it was ubiquitous, you couldn't get away from it, without acknowledging that it was actually very narrow, very focused, and it could have been easily dismantled if only the United States government, in my view, had been serious about going after the financial resources that were keeping those organizations alive. We never did that because in many cases, some of the terrorist activity was being funded by our allies, like the Saudis, the Qataris, and others.
Your company, Berg Associates, it appears that you also specialize in identifying some of these money laundering operations around the world. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because you work with some major banks.
Yeah, if you remember Mukhtar Belmokhtar, he was the head, supposedly the head of Al Qaeda in North Africa. And he kept getting reports. The United States kept killing the guy. He was like a cat with 9 lives. They kept killing him, but he was still alive. Well, he made his money, his financial base revolved around stolen automobiles and cigarettes, contraband cigarettes. Well, what brand of cigarettes was he selling? Well, Philip Morris, Marlboro. We did an investigation on behalf of the European Union and the governors of Colombia into the role of tobacco companies and liquor companies in the world of smuggling, contraband, and knew exactly that these corporations like Philip Morris were actively involved with criminal organizations and terrorist organizations. Mukhtar Belmokhtar, those cigarettes didn't just fall from the sky. He was not like the children of Israel wandering through the desert for 40 years, waking up each morning to find manna had fallen from heaven. He had to go buy those cigarettes from somebody, and the people he was buying the cigarettes from did not take IOUs, they didn't take credit cards, they wanted cash. So all he had to do was follow that network. And in fact, my partner and I briefed the U.S. military special operations forces on this, and they completely ignored us. They could have broken up that organization very quickly if only they had followed the origin of where the cigarettes, because we knew where the cigarettes were being made. And once they're made, they get packaged up in the master cases, and then they get shipped, and they get put on a truck, or they get put on an actual seagoing vessel. Well, there's paperwork always with that, always. And all you got to do is follow. That's what following the money means. So, yeah, it's very easy to go after and look at where these organizations, who was supporting them. Remember, you saw the pictures of ISIS driving around in brand new Toyota pickup trucks. Again, they didn't have their own automobile manufacturing plant, so they were buying those from the Toyota. So somebody from Toyota down knew who they were selling them to, because normally Toyota has dealers, and the dealers are allocated a number of vehicles. So I said, the reason the West did not want to look too hard was it probably would have implicated some major corporations that provide significant political donations to Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. So it's always better just to look away, not do anything about it.
That's very amazing, because I did read on your website, Berg Associates, correct, Larry?
Right.
Is it .com? Would you like people to check it out?
Yeah, the website is sonar21.com. Berg stands for Business Exposure Reduction Group Associates. We're a very small two-man consulting firm. But we've done a lot of important and significant investigations around the world. It's just, it's a matter of knowing how to do the investigations.
Thank you, Larry. A question, as you, in your stellar career, have also, you worked for the State Department. How would you describe what it was like and what the State Department has become? Because Victoria Nuland is one of the people who was very instrumental in 2014, what they call Maidan in Ukraine, which ousted democratically elected President Yanukovych at the time, and started basically the civil war in Ukraine, the war between new government of Ukraine that came to power as a result of EU and United States backed dismissal of that president at the time. And that war keeps going on, and now Russia is involved in that war. So we have the Blinken and Nuland being in our State Department, basically running around the world, exerting this policy of supporting this variety of ousters of legally elected presidents. And she at one point admitted that United States have invested $5 billion into bringing democratic changes to Ukraine, i.e. changing the regime. That's how I view it. But with that said, sure, what is the purpose of State Department? And when you were there, what is your take? How does it operate? How much influence does it have on policy? Or does the State Department run our president? Is it that powerful? Is it really the actual deep state?
Yeah. The quick answer to that is no. I've been fortunate in my career. What's sort of given me some unique insights into government, and I think helps me to become an interesting talking head, let's put it that way, is that my work at the Central Intelligence Agency, I got to work on both the operations side of the house and the analytical side of the house. And I got to work on a high-profile account, the war in Central America, which at the time was one of the top 5 foreign policy priorities. So I was particularly gained insight into the interaction between the intelligence process and the politics at the White House and how those two interplayed. Then when I moved to the State Department's Office of Counterterrorism, I got another interesting revelation of a different kind of bureaucracy. You have to understand, the State Department is primarily staffed by Foreign Service officers. That Foreign Service officers have to go through a selection process. By virtue of that selection process, the Foreign Service officer assumes that they are the most intelligent and the brightest people around, because you don't get to be selected as a Foreign Service officer unless you've taken that test and done well. So there is an arrogance factor built into State Department. And yet, despite all of that arrogance and supposed intelligence, they really do some incredibly dumb things. And just some of the quirkiest, most bizarre personalities. I recall one fellow I worked with, Ambassador Tony Wayne. Tony was a director in the office of the coordinator for counterterrorism at the time, and he's a Christian Scientist. And without disparaging the Christian Science movement, but Tony was constantly sick. So the Christian Scientists don't believe in doctors, taking medicine. He had a constant case of the sniffles. He later went on, became ambassador, I think it was to both Mexico and Argentina. He was a sort of the quintessential guy. The idea at state among the Foreign Service officers was you had to have eyes in your back of your head, because the Foreign Service officer would be very polite and very diplomatic to you up front, but stab you in the back. The frustration for the Foreign Service officer is that most of the top positions at State Department are populated with people who are not from the Foreign Service. They are political appointees. I recall when Donald Trump was elected, and the woman who was running the office of, my former office as coordinator for counterterrorism, she hated Trump, hated. And yet, there on the first day when that new Secretary of State appointed by Trump showed up, boy, she was standing right next to him, holding his hand and smiling big, oh, we're so happy. These people are just shameless. It is, they've got some very bright people, but the really, let's call it the really talented Foreign Service officers that are good diplomats usually get shunted aside. Because they're not willing to engage in the sort of sycophant behavior required to go up the chain of command. But with respect to that, by virtue of being in the State Department at the time, one of my jobs was working with the FBI, who were investigating the Pan Am 103 bombing. And so I got some insight into how the FBI worked, and the difference between FBI collecting evidence, CIA collecting intelligence. Those are really two different functions. They're not interchangeable. And so by having this broad view of how the different bureaucracies operate on particular issues, I worked also closely with the Federal Aviation Administration at the time on aviation security, and with maritime security, the MARAD. So getting all these different perspectives, plus working with the U.S. military special operations, I was one of a very, very small number of people who got, if you will, this very broad insight into how the whole machine works. Because most people, they join an agency like the CIA or Defense Intelligence Agency or National Security Agency, and that's all they see. So it's a very myopic vision, it's tunnel vision. They don't necessarily see how all the different pieces connect. And I was fortunate, I got to see how the pieces connected.
Would you say, Larry, that that instance that you brought about President Trump, could President Trump have fired some of these officials that were behind the scenes sort of adamant about his presidency? And or what is the process? Could the president bring his own people, so to speak, and appoint people he thinks that do the better job? Or does the State Department have a certain procedure where it precludes president from changing some of these actors in the State Department?
No, Trump could have. He could have done a lot to insulate and protect, inoculate himself against this influence, but he didn't. I know for a fact, a friend of mine who's a senior, he held a senior position within the intelligence community by virtue of what he did. And so he had fairly regular access to Trump. And he told Trump within the first, really a month before Trump took office, you need to fire these people. You need to get rid of these people. And Trump just waved him off. 2 years later, they were together in another setting. It was around Christmas time. And Trump came up to him and said, you know, you were right. I should have listened to you. So these were self-inflicted wounds by Trump. He played a character on television. A guy knew how to hire and fire people. But boy, in practice, when he was actually in charge of hiring and firing people, he was terrible at it. Terrible. He selected all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. And part of it was, from what I'm told, he is actually a decent, nice person. He is not inclined to think that people are going to screw him over and do something bad to him. In that regards, Trump was completely unprepared for the snake pit that is Washington, D.C. If he manages to be reelected and go back to the White House, yeah, he needs to start firing an entire, thousands of people, because it's an infestation.
Yes, in one of his campaign little videos, I've heard him saying that if I get back in the office, we will have to get rid of all the warmongers and all of this Victoria Nuland types and all that. So it does appear what you said, that he could have done more for whatever reason, whether he was too trusting, too accepting, or did not expect this to be such a snake den as it probably is in fact. And maybe now it kind of comes back to haunt, because they keep pursuing him every day, and every time there is something popping about Trump,
Right.
We'll see what happens, but we definitely need an overhaul of the State Department. Wouldn't you agree?
No, we need an overhaul of the entire federal government. I mean, candidly, the FBI, the Central Intelligence Agencies, they need to be metaphorically burned around and started. The law enforcement responsibilities currently assigned to the FBI should be taken out there, given to the U.S. Marshals. Personnel should be reassigned. Those bureaucracies have to be dismantled. Now, the odds of that happening are slim and none. It's one of the reasons there is such strident and aggressive opposition to Donald Trump, because Trump does represent a genuine threat to this entrenched bureaucracy that just dominates Washington, D.C. It is the level of corruption there makes what goes on in Ukraine pale in comparison. I've noted in previous writings and commentaries that when I moved to Washington, D.C. first in the summer, August of 1979. And at the time, in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which encompasses Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, of course, you did not have a single Ferrari dealership. You didn't have a Rolls-Royce dealership. There wasn't a Bentley luxury car dealership. Now there is. And what's happened? Why is that possible? It's because of the amount of money that's being used in the U.S. government to buy influence, and the need for members of Congress to constantly raise money. When you look at people like Joe Biden and the fact that he's become a multimillionaire while in government, they don't get paid that much. How does that happen? So it's just the corruption aspects of this are enormous, and it's bipartisan. It's not confined to just the Democrats. It also happens with the Republicans. And again, that's why Trump is feared so much. He's a billionaire who doesn't need the money, and he's not such a greedy person that he's going to abuse that office to further enrich himself and his family. And because he's not willing to do that and play that game, they see him as a threat in DC. He's going to disrupt that revolving door that's made so many people wealthy.
Thank you, Larry. I'm encouraging everybody, if you have a question for Larry, please type it in. I will right now play some of your comments, and I will play some of your questions. Write down from what state in the United States you are typing from and watching at, and also write down what countries you're watching from. And I will ask Larry the question and let him take a full stage on that while I will play your comments, and hopefully we'll get to some of your questions, guys. Everybody on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook, type in your questions for Larry if you have any, and I will play your comments right now. Larry, the question about Snowden and the question about Assange. Is Snowden, as portrayed, the betrayer, the traitor, the divulger of the security threats? What do you think about Snowden's situation, that he found refuge in Russia and now has received Russian citizenship in Russia? Question: why the people in United States, where we're supposed to be the freedom beacon, the liberty beacon, why are the people running to Russia from us? And when they try to expose what my understanding is the government surveillance of American citizens, they actually are being prosecuted. And instead of looking into what that surveillance and some of these activities against Americans are, the people who talk about them have to flee, and then they've been adopt the traitor on Snowden. And also situation on Assange and extradition of Assange over here. Do you think he's a citizen journalist who exposes government corruption, or do you think he's really somebody who violated some type of security of United States secrets? If you take a stage on these two, and I'll play some comments while you say that.
Sure. No, I think both Ed Snowden and Julian Assange, if you will, are heroes and deserving of much respect. Snowden watched how other whistleblowers who came forward to try to warn about the abuses, particularly within the National Security Agency regarding electronic surveillance, how those whistleblowers, Bill Binney, Kirk Beebe, Ed Loomis, and others, how they were treated. And he recognized that coming forward and going through channels was not going to work. So I think he did only, he had no other choice to do what he did, and he did it smartly. I'm glad he landed on his feet. In some respects, being in Russia certainly is better than being in the United States these days, because the United States is acting more and more like the old Soviet Union. The same with Julian Assange. Assange made the mistake of being effective, and he was not aligned with any corporate media. So by virtue of that, they're out to destroy him. And what's been done to him is outrageous. But we can look back at history. Other people like Galileo were held hostage, if you will, and punished for holding views that were considered incorrect at the time, but were vindicated by history. So, in both cases, you're seeing examples of the United States and the Western democracies trying to actually crush people who are doing what, in theory, those democracies would welcome, which is trying to bring to light truths that are being hidden from the public. It's when you look at Russia, again, Russia with its history, going back 1,000 years. Russia has never had the same tradition of the respect for the rights of the individual that are inherent in the West. Yet these days, there would appear there is more freedom of expression in Russia than in the United States. So it's really sort of mind-boggling to watch that transformation as Russia and the United States sort of switch positions on the authoritarian spectrum.
Thank you, Larry. What are your thoughts on AI, artificial intelligence? I read the report the other day and how it will change the reality of CIA. I read the report that the artificial intelligence is going to cause possibly, I believe, 100 million jobs to be eliminated. Do you think that artificial intelligence is a threat to the intelligence community of CIA and FBI and around the world, or to humanity? I believe Elon Musk the other day came out and said that we need to pause development of artificial intelligence, or rather incorporation of it, because of the potential threat. What do you think? How does artificial intelligence will influence, if not, the job of the CIA and intelligence agencies?
I think artificial intelligence is profoundly dangerous. I agree. I think it represents really an existential threat to humanity. And here's why I say that. Right now in the United States, over the last 20 years, there's been a push to stop teaching children how to write in cursive. And in fact, they're just being taught to use keyboard. Well, you can take a chicken, put corn on the keyboard, and teach a chicken how to type. Okay, that doesn't require the typing, the actual hitting of a keyboard. Doesn't really build any significant complex neural pathways in the brain. Cursive, teaching to write in cursive, both the physical movements of the hand integrates, does wire neural pathways in the brain. The same with artificial intelligence. Once you take away the task of people having to think, people having to learn foreign languages on their own. If you say, oh, I'll just rely upon this machine to translate for me, I will not learn Russian, I will not learn Chinese, I will not learn Arabic, then all of a sudden, what you're doing is you're going to dumb down the human brain. The human brain will know, the irony is going to be that the human brain, which created the potential for artificial intelligence, is sowing, it's very much dialectics, it's sowing the seeds of its own destruction. Because by doing this, then people will lose intellectual, lose the ability to fix those machines, to do the software, to control it, or it will become a very small, select caste, let's call it intellectual high priests, that will control the world. I think it is vitally important that artificial intelligence be limited, in order that the human capacity to think, to reason, particularly to do critical thinking, and to develop the mental skills to do a variety of things, that once you have a machine that does it for you, it's called atrophy. It will lead to the atrophy of the brain, is what I think.
I share your concern, Larry. I noticed that all the censorship that we experience right now on social media, including YouTube, including Facebook and Twitter, and basically turning off our gift of speech. They're telling us you can't post this, you can't say this, you can't even talk. Instead of talking to a live human being for support, none of the social media platforms offer live human to talk. They don't even have a phone number. All you have to do is type their support and they will type back. You don't even speak, you don't verbalize anything. I'm afraid that not only we will lose our gift of critical thinking or thinking at all if we are dumbed down from potentially even speaking our opinion, because our opinion now gets labeled as misinformation or disinformation. So we are not allowed to have opinion, means we're not allowed to have critical thinking skills. That atrophies, like you said, our ability to think. On top of it, we can't even speak. We have to type. We cannot even talk to another human being. So we're going to lose our gift of speech. We're going to lose a lot of skills that we have. And what is going to happen with us in the United States? Larry, how are you doing on time? Should we finish a couple of more minutes?
Yeah, we can. I've got some time. Yeah.
Excellent.
When you look at one of the reasons engineers, scientific community are dominated by people from places like Russia, China, and India, is that the complexity of those languages and the complexity of, let's call it, non-Western characters required to write those languages. And it goes back to this concept of building neural pathways. and the uh, the dumbing down that has taken place in the United States just over the last 150, 200 years. When you go back and read what used to be the sort of the daily uh, conversations between people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, they wrote intellectual level far above what is the normal, today with texting, LOL, you know, you use even letters to try to communicate as opposed to
Predictive
the
typing, yeah.
Yeah. So it is, I think it's a trend that ought to really alarm people in the United States in particular, because the United States has enjoyed the luxury of the delusion that we've been in charge of the world. We have been the de facto policeman of the world since the end of World War II. So we're talking about 75 years. That age has now ended. It wasn't marked with, there was not a marquee and fireworks going off and a major announcement on television, but the start of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine last year, the ensuing sanctions on Russia, the disconnection of Russia from SWIFT, and then all provided the predicate for Russia, China, Brazil, India, South Africa to come together to start creating an alternative financial system. And in creating an alternative international financial system, you're really setting up for undermining the very foundation of America's power in the world today. And so what we're witnessing is, America is now, the United States is now out trying to bully and threaten any country that doesn't do what we want them to do. And most of these countries are just ignoring us. Look at Honduras as an example. Honduras for years has been quite the, the poodle of the United States at the end of a leash. And Honduras on its own said, no, we're gonna recognize China as the official government, not Taiwan.
Oh, Taiwan, yeah.
Yeah, huge. I mean, it's one other indicator. Saudi Arabia moving outside of the U.S. spheres. Brazil agreeing that it's going to start buying and selling oil in yuan as opposed to the U.S. dollar. The U.S. the preeminence is coming unraveled right before our eyes, and not a lot of people here in the United States see it or understand it.
I watched one of the podcasts. I believe Scott Ritter said something that stuck in my mind. He said, "A petrodollar is dead. It just doesn't know it yet."
Yeah. No, I think Scott's
it's unfortunately that our favorite quote unquote President Biden seemed to have declared that he is a new world order leader, but so far there are no leadership type actions from United States. We basically are instigating and continuing supplying weapons to Ukraine that kill more Ukrainians. We are not involved in any kind of extension of peace talks with Russia. We're agitating China. We're antagonizing North Korea, who said that military exercises between United States and South Korea were as if declaration of war. That's how they view it in North Korea. So we're running around with our President Biden, basically picking fights with nuclear nations. In the meantime, they're looking at us as a mad dog that just can't stop, doesn't have a reverse gear. And they're trying to grow their own ties between them. A Chinese leader traveled to see Vladimir Putin. They've signed a lot of economical packages and cooperation, and even agreed that they will trade their natural resources for Chinese yuan. And, on the top of it, Chinese were instrumental with reestablishing relations between Saudis and Iran. So where is United States in any of it? Nobody wants to talk to Biden. It was said that Biden and even Zelensky are waiting from the phone call from Chinese leader after meeting with Putin, but nobody's calling.
Yeah.
So we're basically being pushed to the side because nobody seems to want to deal with us anymore. And the world is restructuring, the world is growing ties, they're building their linear connections or whatnot without us. And this should concern every American. What do you think, Larry? Is petrodollar something that basically, as a consequence of it, is going to lose and lose its power? What does it mean for Americans? What are we going to do?
Well, I was sitting here looking. I wanted to read you a comment I think it just made in the last 24 hours by the Chinese Ministry of Defense spokesperson Tan Kefei, who said, "The Chinese army is ready to support international and regional security and stability with the Russian army and contribute to the creation of a community of one destiny for humanity. Russian-Chinese relations are not the military-political alliance that existed during the Cold War. They surpass such a model of state relations." So what happened last week in Moscow between Xi Jinping and Putin was without precedent in history. It was a historical moment, just like, let's call it, the arrival of Columbus on the shores of in the Caribbean island of Haiti. This represents a significant, a world-changing moment. And because going forward right now, China and Russia are going to cooperate militarily. That means Russia is going to be able to supply the Chinese with advanced weapons that the Chinese don't have, that will fend off U.S. Aircraft carrier battle groups. It means that China's production capacity will be enlisted to help provide Russia with additional military equipment that Russia has designed and created, but can now outsource some of the manufacturing. So we're witnessing this dramatic change, and the United States is not in a position militarily or economically to counter any of this. And that's really what's sort of bizarre, that the United States insists that it can go out and sanction China and sanction Russia and sanction South Africa and sanction Saudi. Whenever you punish everybody, and yet going forward, I saw Marco Rubio last night, the senator from Florida, and he made a very candid admission. He says, and he was talking about Brazil's deal with the Chinese in terms of buying oil. He goes, if it continues this way, the U.S. will not have any ability to punish any other country, because our economic sanctions will be meaningless, because if everybody else is using something other than the dollar sanctions have no effect. Ding, 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 the light bulb goes on. That's exactly what's in process of being developed. These other countries, from China, Russia, Iran, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, they're not going to be held hostage to the dollar any longer. They recognize the United States as a bully and is crazy, and they're not going to be tied to us in the way they were in the last 50 years.
Well, look at Erdogan, and I want to play this little comment. William Landers is saying, is Biden really working for China and Russia? Seems it. He had done more for United States ending policies since he took office, while claiming he was fighting them. Yeah, I'm saying that Biden should put his campaign slogan, "Make China Great Again." What do you say, Larry?
Yeah. He can say, well, Biden can say, I did that. I understand why people say that Biden clearly is, his policies are strengthening both Russia and China. I still don't believe he's smart enough to be able to, do that on his own, do that consciously. He's a demented 80-year-old with advanced Alzheimer's, I believe, and he ought to be removed from office as soon as possible. But it's not just him; it's the people around him, the Jake Sullivans, the
and
Anthony
we're not
Blinkens.
advocating for removal of United States presidents from office. What Larry is saying, that he has to be not elected in the next cycle if American people wish not to do that. Just clarity for
Well, actually,
everybody.
he could be removed under the 25th Amendment.
Oh,
It's
really?
designed to deal with people, yeah, designed to deal with people who are both physically or mentally incapacitated as a
Physically, yeah,
president.
for physical reasons I'm talking about. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, there
Yeah,
is a provision for that.
but
Larry,
but
what
I
about?
I think you're right. It's not likely to happen. It should happen, but I don't think it will.
Well, they're not interested in evaluating. I think I read something from his doctor that he had concerns regarding Biden's health, his own doctor, but nobody else seems to be concerned. And of course, we're the laughing stock of entire world. I watch Ukrainian and Russian and European channels alike posting unfortunate videos with very much distracted United States president looking for exit or looking for entrance, or it's hard to watch. And of course we wish him the best of health, but it definitely seems to be difficult for him in his senior age.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
with Russia, China, he seems to have brought them together and their alliance is strengthening. And entire world is, like you said, is getting tired of this rules-based international order, which is not based on international law or UN charter. Apparently, this is something we've invented, the rules-based international order. I think I watched interview from Mr. Putin, Russian president. He said, nobody knows what it means, the
Yeah.
rules-based international order. Russia is like, what is it? It's not based on international law. It's whatever United States wants. And it looks like the BRICS countries are getting tired of it. Today, Erdogan, the Turkey, leader, came out and he said that United States have to stop interfering in our internal sovereignty and try to pressure us to enter the war with Ukraine. Erdogan said it today. Then yesterday, Netanyahu, Israeli prime minister, came out and said, we have a great friendship with the United States, but United States have to stop interfering into our internal processes, which they have this judicial reform that sparked this enormous protests. And apparently United States were making it clear how they would like this to be resolved. So Netanyahu, our ally, is saying, stop interfering. Erdogan, our ally in NATO partner, says, stop interfering. Are we listening? Are we going to lose every friend we have? And then what do you think our fate will be, Larry, if we are alienating all the allies? Look what Germany, Nord Stream 2 and 1 explosions. Seymour Hersh implicated that possibly Biden had something to do with it. Of course, we don't have any hardcore evidence of that, but definitely Germany's exposed pipelines caused the enormous damage to their infrastructure and energy security. I read an article that Europe is going to freeze next year because they will not have all the supplies of gas. So what are we doing with our allies, Larry? How would you evaluate what are we doing with our allies? Are we going to lose all friends?
Well, the quick answer is yes. The United States has embarked on a policy designed to alienate every country that we used to rely upon. Go back and look at the emergence of the Arab Spring 20 years ago, and that was funded in part by U.S. and British intelligence, and deliberately trying to destabilize certain governments in the Arab world. We succeeded in Libya, Algeria to a lesser extent. Tried to ignite the war we did ignite the civil war in Syria. And that was being done with money coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who were working friendly with us, as well as Turkey. Turkey and the United States were coordinating closely. Just a week before the CIA base in Benghazi was attacked, David Petraeus, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency at the time, and former U.S. Army general, went to Turkey to meet with Turkish authorities to tell them that because of concerns of the upcoming election for Barack Obama, the United States was going to start cutting back on its supply of weapons to the Syrian rebels who were fighting against Bashar, as they feared that would, lead to some possible political blowback on Obama. Well, the day that Chris Stevens, the U.S. ambassador who went to Benghazi, was killed, earlier that day, he had met with a Turkish diplomat. And again, that meeting was to coordinate and try to ease the tensions over the U.S. would then stop supplying the weapons that were coming out of Libya and being shipped to Turkey. So that's just one example of how this cooperative friendship from years ago is now soured with respect to Turkey. It's soured with respect to Saudi Arabia. It's soured with respect to the United Arab Emirates. The United States has, excuse me, embarked on a policy of alienation. This is a fact.
Larry, how would you, if you were advising President Biden, how would you derail this Russia-Ukraine situation? What would be the advice? Would you advise to immediately start peace talks with Putin? Because we know that one of the grievances why this entire conflict, it was about NATO expansion. And the fact that Ukraine was a potential candidate to join NATO. Would you advise to start the peace talks and insist on Ukraine's NATO neutrality, or would you say let's remove all Russia's troops from Ukraine? Because we know, like I think one of your interviews with Judge Napolitano was that Russia's position, it will not remove its troops from Crimea. Ukraine's position, they have to remove their troops from Crimea and Donbass. How do you reconcile this unreconcilable polar opposite positions? And what would you advise Biden? What needs to be done to finish this? Or do you think this is going to go for another 10 years? It's been already going on for the last 9.
Yeah, well, the war in Ukraine is going to be a massive U.S. defeat, and probably, I think, culminate in the breakup of NATO.
Defeat, you broke up. You said massive defeat, correct? That's what I've heard.
Yeah, a massive defeat for the United States, and will lead ultimately to the breakup of NATO. What needs to be done cannot be done. What needs to be done is for the United States to come out and communicate to Russia, yes, we agree that the United States should not be supporting elements that are linked to Stefan Bandera in Ukraine. We're going to eliminate all of that support immediately. Number 2, we agree that Ukraine should never be part of NATO, and we will not receive any more military assistance from the United States or from Europe, and that it will become a buffer state. That needs to happen, but it's not going to happen. I think those are the only sort of two conditions that would have to be in place before Russia would even entertain a ceasefire. So this war on, the United States is going to be destroyed, and in the process of because look at it, we've already emptied.
What did you say will be destroyed? I'm sorry, it broke up. What did you say will be destroyed?
The United States' ability to project military force is in the process of being destroyed.
Okay.
It is. We've emptied. We no longer have the ability to produce artillery shells to supply Ukraine with what they need. We do not have tank factories in place building tanks at any pace. We can turn out 5 a year. It's ridiculous. We have no comparable capability to what Russia has. So what we're looking at here is just the exposure of Western weakness. After portraying ourselves as being strong. It's like that scene from The Wizard of Oz at the end, where Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man are all there, and they hear, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Well, you know, the great and powerful Oz, the great and powerful United States really is that man behind the curtain. An itinerant preacher from Kansas who's not all powerful, all knowing, and is built on lies. So that's where we're headed.
Thank you, Larry. I don't want to take any more of your precious time. I know that you've been paged and called, but I surely have more to ask, maybe for the savings for the next time. Everybody who was watching with us, YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook, make sure to subscribe, like, share with us, make your comments, talk to each other in comment section. And we're thanking Larry Johnson today, former CIA analyst, the founder of Berg Associates, and we also have Larry's wonderful answers to rewatch when we feel like it. The video will be posted on all these platforms. Feel free to share with us today. Thank you all who commented, who watched, joined us today, and thank you very much, Larry Johnson.
Thank you, Elena. It's good to be with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Larry. Bye-bye.